There we go.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right, we're off and rolling. So thanks, guys, for jumping on the call. So I can see a couple of familiar faces on Google Meet, and there's a bunch of people signing in through LinkedIn that we can't see, but welcome to those people as well. So we've been looking forward to this one for a couple of weeks. So we try to run these webinars once a month, and we pick topics that, you know, we're noticing in the work that we do are sort of relevant and topical, and stuff that we can confidently talk to because we've dealt with it before and we've solved these things. So we had a little debate a couple of weeks ago, and we're like, oh, what should we talk about at the next one? And we thought about the work and the projects that were live for us, and we've been doing quite a few survey projects lately. So engagement surveys, culture surveys, psychosocial hazard surveys, that sort of thing. And what we noticed was that some of these were sort of like one-off initiatives sort of occurring in isolation and not part of a broader listening strategy. And we thought, well, that's a bit of a missed opportunity. And so we thought this would be a great topic for this one. And we always come at it from the angle of, how do we talk about something in a really practical way, whether you're a small business through to a large business? So stuff that you can take away and do, you know, tomorrow, essentially. And we've been there, we've done it, we've made plenty of mistakes. So we're trying to save you some of the heartache and wasted time and resources by doing stuff that we know that works. So can you flick to the next one, Ryan? So here's what we're going to cover today. So just going to talk through, I suppose, the different ways that you can listen, because there's multiple methods that you can use, and then where it goes wrong. So sometimes we do these things and they don't quite work, or that they don't quite land, and there's usually some common themes when that happens. Then Ivan will take us through sort of the 5 pillars for how you design or tweak or level up your existing strategy. And then the all-important part around data. So we do these things and we get information in data, and then we've got to do something with it. So how do you get the insights out of it? And then how do you go and take action that's actually going to move the dial? And on the things that the business cares about, like, you know, employee engagement, reducing unwanted turnover, those sorts of things. And then we'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end, and any next steps around if you want to dive a bit deeper into your existing strategy. So we'll click to the next one, please, Ryan. So just a really quick bit about us. So I'm Clint Strahan, a partner at Exsona. The doctor bit's there because I did a PhD many years ago looking at employee engagement and accountability in leadership. And since then, I've sort of worked in a few different consulting businesses and did a pretty solid stint of about 7 years in sort of senior leadership roles in corporate environment. And actually, Ivan was my boss for that is 7 years. Do you want to do a quick intro about yourself, Ivan?
Yeah, so where we worked together, and Ryan, our other partner as well, was at UE Insurance. So I was the chief people officer there from the inception of the business, so from startup phase through until a couple of years ago. So we took it, the 3 of us, all the way from no employees to about 2,500 employees. So as we get towards the back end of this today, I'll share some stories about our listening strategies that we employed at UE as well. But yeah, we've all been around the block for a while.
Yep, and we get it. You know, people and culture can be pretty hard, so we try to make it a bit simpler, a bit more predictable, so you can be a bit less stressed and hopefully have a bit more fun as well. And we've come up with this term for ourselves. We call ourselves the world's only workforce success legends. Now, we've checked, no one else uses it, maybe because it's a bit of a wanky name, we're not sure. But we just sort of trying to make the point that we're not interested in generic HR consulting where we give you a plan and or a policy and walk away and over to you. We're kind of really interested in just getting shit done, getting results, actually moving the dial. And that's what we think of as a workforce success legend. Over the next one, please, Ryan. So look, to get stuck in, I think a good place to start is that there's a whole bunch of different ways that a business can listen. And it really falls into 3 main buckets. And the first is direct dialogue, pretty self-evident, right? Conversations, and they can be one-on-ones, workshops, roundtables, focus groups, town halls, that sort of thing. And that strategy is quite personal. So it can be really powerful, and you can delve into different topics and, go down the rabbit holes and see where things go, and really good for generating ideas and feedback from people. But at the same time, pretty hard to scale and pretty time consuming. And sometimes in those sorts of things, you guys would have all experienced it. It's the loudest voices that take up the most airtime, and the people who are a bit more shy and quiet can hold back. And a really challenging part with that is, how do you capture the feedback that comes out of those sorts of things and turn it into data and insight? How do you capture that? Because that's often the bit that gets missed. Like, you have all these conversations and we listen and we hear, but we don't capture that. The second bucket is internal comms. And usually when you think about internal comms, you're thinking about emails and, one-way communication. But these days we're pretty lucky. There's a bunch of different platforms, Yammer and Teams and Slack and all these cool platforms now that can make it much more effective for two-way communication, where you can really listen. And a lot of these tools now have functions like polls. You can run little pulse surveys, you can create threads and discussion groups, and some of them will have, the likes like Facebook, or, different reactions as well, where you can start to see how people feeling about certain topics. And even more recently, the AI is getting pretty good, and you can do things like run a sentiment analysis on your internal comms platform and say, hey, what are the big issues that people are talking about, and how do they feel about it? So the technology's, it's gone ahead in leaps and bounds and can be really useful for listening. And, the upside is you often get the employee-driven topics. You see where things go, and it's a bit more organic and it's real time. The downside is, usually these things are public forums, so people might not be as forthcoming with their feedback at times. And if you use these things, they come with all the bells and whistles, and you get excited about all the things it can do. But if you just leave it to a life of its own and don't monitor and respond to feedback, they tend to die a slow death. People stop engaging. And then the last big bucket is surveys. Like, everyone knows what a survey is. There's engagement surveys and culture and well-being and exit and onboarding. There's a million different types of surveys. And surveys are great because they give you quantitative data. So you get some hard numbers you can look at, really scalable. So if you've got 5,000 people, scalable way to get feedback and listen. And if you've got your surveys on a cadence, you can start to track things over time as well. So really handy for those reasons. At the same time, can be a bit impersonal because people are just sitting there tapping away or on their phone. So there's not that human to human sort of contact and connection there, and can be restrictive in that you're only going to get feedback on the questions that you ask. So it can be limited in that sense. And survey fatigue is very real. We do plenty of surveys, and that's always front of mind for the people we work with. They're like, oh, we already do 5 surveys. How do we do another one? So survey fatigue is real. And what we've noticed is that, most businesses, they pick one of these and they do that quite well. And the gap seems to be, the sort of the multi-pronged approach and using multiple methods and tools, kind of depending on the business context and what it is you're trying to achieve. So that's where we see the real gap as being. But if we flick to the next one, Brian, you can do all the right things. And we talk to lots of businesses and they say, yep, we do an annual engagement survey and we do town halls and we do this and that, but it's not quite, it's not quite landing, and it's not giving us what we need. So the things that we do can fail. The big reason is people don't engage with it. So your staff are just not contributing, not buying in. And that can be for a few reasons. It could be that you haven't promoted it well enough or communicated about it well enough. That can be it sometimes. Sometimes it can just be like system access things, particularly with your comms platforms. Like some people will use them because they're sitting on their computer all day, and that's fine. Other people are out in the field and they just don't use those things. The biggest one, though, is that if there's any history of you ask for feedback, but then nothing happens with it, people tend to disengage pretty quickly. It's like, well, you asked me, I told you, nothing happened. So like, why would I keep giving you feedback? That's the big one. And as I said before, if you're over reliant on one thing, that tends to restrict strategy. So not using the right tools and the right mediums in the right ways at the right times can be a big limiting factor. And then sometimes you do all that right, you get all the feedback, and within the business, you're sitting there with all this information and data, but you're unable to extract out, well, what are the real key insights here that we need to act on? And we've certainly experienced that when we're in financial services. We had data everywhere. The trick wasn't getting more. The trick was actually getting to the heart of what was going on. And the last point there is about sort of executive buy-in or executive interest. So I've been there and done it. You're sitting in a senior leader meeting, you've got the engagement survey results or whatever, and no one's that interested. And usually that's because we haven't connected the dots properly for senior leaders and executives. So they haven't connected the dots that, hey, we've got some feedback here, we've listened, and if we act on it, that's going to connect and improve the things that I care about, like productivity or engagement or reducing unwanted turnover. So that's usually where it falls down, because they just haven't quite got it. And then the really sucky thing then is, usually if you want to take action and do something, spend some money or some time or some resources, you need that executive team on board. So it's sort of that, that's not a fun place to be, but the trick is to help connect the dots for them. So from here, I'll hand over to Ivan and he'll talk us through the framework and then some of the stories of stuff that we've done and has worked and hasn't worked.
The real world. Thanks, Clint. That was great. Yeah, I guess as Clint said earlier, we've done between us PhDs on this topic, run hundreds of surveys over decades, etc. But what we like to try and do in this sort of masterclass series is boil all of that stuff down into the simplest version of its essence. So this is our 5-pillar framework on how to sort of get your listening strategy right. So the first one, not surprisingly, is purpose. Like if you start from the point of view that you're actually trying to solve a specific problem or focus on a particular problem, then that's how you make sort of the rest of the elements come together. So in this example, we might say that employee turnover might be the actual issue or problem that you're trying to solve for the business. And then if you're thinking about that as you move through the other elements, you'll tie together the sort of right pieces to make the strategy effective. So the second pillar is channels, and this is what Clint sort of run through in some detail there. You've got a whole heap of different options available, from face-to-face stuff to surveys to internal comms platforms, etc. So with our purpose in mind, whatever problem we're trying to solve, you need to be selecting the right mix, I suppose. As Clint said, it's no point doing all your eggs in one basket. There'll be different ways that you should be listening, and that might evolve over time. So timing is the third element. So we might all have sort of experienced this, but if you don't get the timing right on these things, then it can fail from the start. So for example, if you're going to run an employee engagement survey, there's no point trying to roll it out on Christmas Eve, because half the people aren't going to be bothered filling it in. The other half are so happy they're going on holidays that it's probably not going to give you a true representation of where things are at. But you also need to think about that action piece that Clint was talking about. So if you're going to expect your executive team to look at the insights you draw out of something like a survey and work with you on turning that into action, then there's no point trying to engage them in that process in the middle of, end of financial year or a moment in time like that where they're just too busy to. And the other thing to think about with timing is sort of how you're gathering your information. So I'm sure we've all had experiences of doing, say, an annual survey on a topic, which is great. You get a real depth of understanding of that moment in time and how people are feeling. But as we all know, things change fast in business. You might have a big restructure or something changes, and 3 months later, the sentiment might have changed completely. So think about in your mix how you're getting that information, and we'd certainly suggest that you try and get some real-time information as well as those sort of periodic snapshots. The fourth pillar is analysis. So particularly with surveys, there's all sorts of insights that you can draw, but only if you sort of analyse the information in the right way, and we'll give you a few tips on that in a moment. So it might be quantitative data, or you might have some good qualitative stuff. And as Clint said, there's ways to, through AI and other models to extract some better value out of that. And then the last pillar, not surprisingly, is action. So making sure that our decision makers are standing by, waiting with bated breath for the insights and the recommendations on what we're going to do to make the world a better place, and getting on and moving into action mode. Thanks, Ryan. Jump into the next one. So just to touch briefly on how to get the most from your survey data. So again, I think we've all probably run surveys, but how do we get the most out of it? So our starting point is to begin by looking for universal themes. So if we think about an issue like turnover that we're trying to solve, if you can find some universal themes and then actually take some action on those, that's where you're going to get most bang for your buck, because it's the issue that's affecting the most people. From there, we'll always recommend that you do some demographic splits. So the most common one is usually department. Everyone's interested to see where are the high and low points around the organisation. So splitting by department's important. We'd also recommend doing some other demographic splits like tenure, because often there's different themes for people that are newly employed with the organisation versus those that have been around a couple of years and your long-termers. So that's useful. Obviously, gender demographic split is important. Age-based demographic splits are important. And all you're really trying to do there is just isolate, pain points. So where around the organisation are there issues that are more apparent, and it helps you with your tactics and strategies if you know exactly which cohorts you're trying to tackle. Looking for correlations back to your business problem. So if our business problem's turnover, you want to be looking at the areas of the business and the people where turnover is the biggest issue, and then looking for themes in your survey feedback that match with that, because tackling those issues is what's likely to fix the turnover problem. Clint talked about sentiment analysis. So with most surveys, we have an open text question or two, and then how do we extract the most value out of that? But yeah, running it through AI and asking for some themes to be pulled out is a much quicker way to do it than the old way we used to do it, which was read every comment and try and tag them into themes, etc. So yeah, there's quicker and easier ways these days, which is great. We'd also talk about if you're communicating data back to people in the business, whether that's the people who completed the survey or whether it's your executive team, always try and boil down the data into its simplest version when you're communicating it back with people. Obviously, behind the scenes, we're cutting the data 1,000 different ways and there's all sorts of interesting stuff. But if the point is to move towards action, then the simpler you make it, top couple of themes is going to get you the best result. And then if we think about how to sort of capture the executive's interest, they're often cohorts or groups that are more interested in numbers. So presenting that back to them in sort of in key numbers is important. Thanks, Ryan. So in terms of how we can try and influence our decision makers, usually your executive team. So normally where we would start is we're drawing out some sort of insights from people data, whether it's turnover, whether it's survey results, etc. And we would then try to sort of boil that down. So in this case, we're talking about turnovers going up by 10%. And then what we need to try and do is convert that into exec speak for something that they'll really care about fixing. So in this case, we might say, because turnover's gone up by 10%, we're actually losing $2 million a year in rehiring costs. And we've got a calculator we can share with you that'll help you to sort of get those numbers. There we go. Here's the metric. Here's why executive team should care about it. And then we move from there into, so the listening insights are, these are the key issues that need to be solved. Here's our recommendations. And we've sort of drawn that as a cycle, because really what you need to do is come back periodically to the same stuff and go, okay, we moved the dial on turnover by 5%. So that's saved us $1 billion in potential costs. And then maybe you're moving into more recommendations and saying, hey, we think we should reinvest some of that saving in this new initiative. So this is just a screenshot of our calculator. So we've developed our own turnover cost calculator. Post the session, we'll send out some information and we'll send a link to that, but we're also happy to talk people through it and sit with them and make sure that they're getting the numbers right. But turnover, in our experience, is probably the easiest one to get your executive teams agitated about, because it's a very simple one to calculate the cost, and the numbers, unfortunately, are huge, as we all know, probably better than most. Thanks, Ryan. So just to talk you through a quick case study now. So we've sort of talked about, strategy, etc., and some of the thinking behind it. But here's a practical example of where we've applied this thinking. So back to UE Insurance. So just to sort of walk you through how we set up our listening strategy initially, and then how we evolved it over time. Might give you a few ideas. So if we look at the business from its startup through to the point where it sort of was about 2,500 people. The early years at UE, we were growing very quickly, and so not surprisingly, we didn't have everything in order the way we would have liked to have been. So we had employee engagement that was too low, and we had employee turnover that was too high. So back in the early days, that was sitting at around 40% annualized turnover, particularly in the call center part of the business. So our initial early sort of listening strategies were around putting in place an annual engagement survey. And that was great because it gave us a really deep dive into what all the particular issues were at the time. So moment in time stuff. And one of the things we learned through looking at the data was that turnover in early tenure was actually our problem. So we wanted to really understand what was happening during our induction process and training program. So we put in place an induction training survey. So as people came out of that, we'd get a good sense as to how prepared they felt for the real world, which was really useful. And then we did some face-to-face listening sessions that we called U-Talk sessions. So those were actually really cool, probably the most fun I've had in listening sessions. So myself and the CEO would sit at lunchtime in a boardroom with 20 employees, different people each day, and we would just talk, and we'd let the employees set the agenda, what was on their mind, what did they want to talk about. It was a fantastic strategy for early days because we needed to make lots of changes and really understand what was happening. So we could actually workshop issues and ideas on the spot, which was pretty cool. And it was great for dispelling myths as well, because a lot of the issues people thought were real. They'd heard a rumor that something was happening, but we could just put out fires and dispel myths as we went. But I think probably one of the most effective parts of that strategy is that the CEO was really super engaged with wanting to move to action. So when you sit in a room with people and they're sharing their emotions, with you about what they love and what's challenging for them in your organisation, it really pushed us to want to work really hard to solve problems. And you certainly didn't want to come back 6 months later and sit in the room with the same people and say, yeah, you told us that 6 months ago and we haven't done anything about it. So it really helped us with a bias towards, positive action, which was cool. And then obviously exit interview surveys. So when turnover is an issue, you really want to understand as people are leaving, what are the key themes. And then over time, we evolved to, I guess, maybe a slightly more sophisticated approach. So we introduced a pulse survey, which is just a single question survey that we would send out to a randomized selection of about 10% of employees each day. Really simple question: how was your day at work today? And people just pick on a 5-point scale between sort of terrible and awesome. And that was really effective for us because we could see where problems were bubbling up before they turned into turnover. So it was a really good sort of early warning system for us, and you could see which areas of the business were struggling. We were also very values focused as an organisation. So over time, we moved into having an annual values survey where we just asked people how well we were living and breathing each of the individual values that the company stood for. Where we moved into leadership 360 surveys again, so we could look for potential issues, particularly around turnover, and help leaders with whatever their people said that they were struggling with. We also started capturing lots of information about programs that we were running in P&C that people were attending. So capturing when people would attend a health and wellbeing activity or a reward and recognition activity, etc. And over time, we were able to really prove the importance of those things and refine our approach by tracking what was working and what wasn't. We also then moved into using an internal comms platform. We called it Your Voice, but essentially, as Clint described earlier, it was an open forum where people could raise any issues they wanted to. As the business, leaders could respond, have a good open dialogue. And again, it was fantastic for dispelling myths. And then finally, we moved on to having randomized engagement surveys. So rather than doing a once per year, big question set, we had smaller question sets, just 2 or 3 questions that would go out randomly weekly to different people around the organisation. So we could have a really steady flow of feedback rather than having to wait for another year to sort of get that. So that worked really well for us, and in terms of sort of solving turnover issues over that period, we sort of went from about 40% turnover to about 18%, and we're able to maintain it there for years by just listening, watching, acting. Thanks, Ryan. So hopefully that's been useful to get a bit of theory and a bit of here's how it might apply in the real world. But obviously this has been us talking at you. But we'd love to hear from you guys, how you're running this in your businesses. So if people want to grab their phones, you can zap this QR code and book in to have just a 30-minute chat with us on this topic. So we're really happy to have you tell us how things work for you at the moment. We can help you with that turnover cost calculator, and we're really happy to give you some recommendations based on our experience of adjustments that you might be able to make to your approach. So yeah, please book in and have a chat with us. I would have loved someone to do that for me 15 years ago, so we didn't have to learn so much of this stuff through trial and error. But yeah, please book in, and we're happy to spend a little bit of time with you. Thanks, Ryan.
We'll send through the turnover calculator, the slides, and everything else as well at the end. So I notice we're on 12:30, so bang on.
Yep.
We'll hang around if anyone wants to ask any questions. So up to you guys.
Anyone got any burning issues they want to throw out there now?
Hey guys, hope you don't mind me jumping in.
Go, Matt.
Thanks for that session. I think one sort of broad question, I think it's clear that the more data points, the better, right? But how do you guys go about, testing a hypothesis or having a really blank canvas and then digging into that data? We've got all the tools at our disposal, but then it's really hard to, dig in deeper without sort of assuming too much. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I start with more isn't always better. But
yeah, fair.
You want to be strategic around how and how often you ask, because you can overload people, and that's no good. But I mean, if you've got a hypothesis that would have, that can, the process is the same, right? We have an issue, we think we've got a solution. I reckon the best approach is to utilize your existing methods to whatever extent you can to understand what's actually happening before formulating a response. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think you go hypothesis, context is example, attrition is high, hypothesis is leadership development, whatever.
Yeah.
I guess, how do you not get caught going down that rabbit hole and missing out all the other things, if that makes,
Yeah, all I'd say is you've got a limited amount of time and resources, year on year. So I suppose what we did was we would look for the insights, and let's say it was leadership development and maybe one or two other things. And we would generally try and only tackle, 2 or 3 major sort of projects or programs or whatever per year. So we would always look to the data to see where were people crying out and saying, look, this is the worst part about working here. And those would be the things we'd isolate our focus on. It's hard because all the other stuff is still important and you want to get to it, but you've got to be practical about, the time and resources and also the bandwidth of the business to, to be making decisions on and trying to solve some of those problems. So I guess at the end of the day, make it as simple as you can. Pick 2 or 3 things, but go a bit harder at those. So rather than trying to solve 12 potential issues a little bit, pick out 2 or 3 and do them really well. And what we found was in doing that, you were essentially with those ones, once they were in place, you're just doing little refinement tweaks over time and you move on to some other bigger, chunkier thing that you can work on. Does that help, Matt?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thanks for the session as well.
Awesome.
Well, on that one, as you were talking, Ivan, I was just thinking, if you've got a hypothesis but you're not sure and your existing data doesn't quite get you there, the simplest thing in the world but time intensive is go and talk to some people. Where is the problem occurring? Go and have some conversations and just take that time. And like we do projects sometimes that involve a lot of focus groups, and there might be 6 focus groups, but after the second one, you pretty much know what's going on. You don't have to talk to 80 people. Usually once you've talked to 10, you got a fair idea.
Yeah, that's where it goes back to the channels piece, having as many different touch points. Yeah.
And if you're more data focused, then you can always look at things like correlations between things. So we used to do that quite a lot. We built some pretty cool dashboards where we could associate any 2 lines of data together and look at correlations between them. So for example, we had a good model where we could see whether people attending our health and wellbeing program activities actually connected with things like turnover and sick leave, etc., through looking at the strength of the correlations between those, or breaking the groups out into different cohorts and looking at those people who attend a lot versus those who don't attend at all, and then looking at that versus something like turnover. So over time, I guess we got a bit more sophisticated about seeing where those relationships were. And that really helped us with refining all of our offerings, because over time we could kind of drop the stuff that didn't look like it was having an impact on anything and invest more of our time on the stuff that looked like it was actually connected to turning a big dial. But again, we're happy, like if you want to chat offline, Matt, you can book us in. We're happy to talk through some of the things that we've done there from a data perspective.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Awesome. Any final questions? Suzanne?
Yeah.
I have a question. For starters, I really like your mantra, GSD. So get shit done is what I would call it. My questions are around, I love the fact that you went from 40% to 18% from a turnover. I never thought about looking into tenure. Why I do look into tenure, I look into overall tenure, and for us it's around that 3-4 years, but they start young.
Yeah.
But I do know that my turnover is in the lower management shift levels, so I've still got a pretty good idea. I'd like to know more about the post-induction training survey.
Yep.
So would that be a 30-minute conversation?
No, that was an online survey. So we had a trigger as people came out of
I meant, should I book it in?
I do need to book it in. We can give you the brief overview of what it was now. That's fine.
Yeah. Do you have an example available?
I can talk to what it
Okay.
covered, the survey, if you like. But again, yeah, we can get into more detail and give you some specifics if you want to have a chat with us later. But essentially, it looked at the training program itself. So I broke down, get feedback from people on. Initially, we had like CEO presentation and some values related stuff at the front end. So we'd ask people to rate how did that go, and then we break down all the elements that of what they had training on. Systems training, PDS, so sort of job knowledge, practice runs on taking phone calls from pretend people, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So for each element of the program itself, we just got feedback. It was all on the same scale where they just go between whatever score 1 to 10. So we could see universally what was going well, what was going poorly, and then we can break it out by different departments and stuff like that. So if they were training for sales or if they were training for customer service or whatever. So over time, we could just track that, and it was really useful because it was, we'd have the same trainer running in induction, so we could see which trainers were getting better feedback on which elements of the training, and then whoever was getting the best one would coach their colleagues and go, oh, this is how I'm running that session. So we're able to refine that, pretty quickly over time.
My thoughts are, because that's a post-induction training survey,
Mm-hmm.
and when I think about now, because I always want things now, I also noticed that you said like 2 to 3 questions going out weekly to select people. Would that be something that you could use for people that are going through training? Have you used it in that way?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, to go in a bit more detail, we did surveys during training as well as at the end. So I think there was one part that went out after week 1, and then there was another one that went out after week 4 when they'd actually finished the induction. And then there was another one that went out maybe after their first month of being active in the role. But yeah, that idea of randomizing some questions and getting it out to people worked really well for us, and it wasn't particularly complicated to do from a systems perspective. So yeah, we definitely highly recommend getting some of that real-time feedback. Yeah.
Okay, that was my questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Suzanne. Hopefully we'll chat again soon.